Hello everyone, we are in Pirkei Avot, the second parak, Mishnah 11. This year is dedicated to Le'ilu Nishmat, my mother, Imei Morati and Naomi Bat Yosef. She passed away 13 years ago, so good cause. Okay, let's go into it. So Amar Lahem, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his Talmidim, we're still in this sugya. Su'uhu ezuhi derech ra'a shitrachek mimena ha'adam. Right? I'm going to save the translation to the end because it's a longer Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ain Ra'a. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Chaver Ra. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shachen Ra. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Halove ve'eno meshalem. אחד הלווה מן האדם כלווה מן המקום הברוך שנאמר אצל תהילים לווה רשע ולא ישלם וצדיק חונן ונותן. רבי אלעזר אומר לב רע אמר להם רבי יוחנן בן זכאי said to them ורואה אני את דברי אלעזר בן ערך מדבריכם שבכלל דבריו דבריכם. Okay, so here Rabbi Yochanan said unto them, go forth and observe which is the evil way which a man should shun. Rabbi Eliezer said, an evil eye. Rabbi Yehoshua said, an evil companion or friend. Rabbi Yossi said, an evil neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said, one who borrows and does not repay For he that borrows from man is as one who borrows from God. Blessed be he, as it is said in Tehillim, the wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous deal graciously and give. Rabbi Elazar said, an evil heart. He, Rabbi Yochanan, said to them, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arach, or in his words, your words are included. I.e., an evil heart includes all of them. Okay, so we will not be able to go through all of these midos, but we will go through is a couple of interesting questions brought up by the Mefarshim. One of them is Rabbeinu Yonah, and he notes that it is well known that the opposite of the way a person should walk is the way a person should not walk. Right? So why do we need to go through a whole Mishnah of this is the way a person should walk? Then we say, we ask, what is the good way a person should walk? And then we have them say all 5 of their answers. Then what is the way a person should not walk? We can, once you know A, you'll know B, right? I mean, if A is the good way, then not A is the bad way. So why do we need to go and kind of repeat? There's an Ayin Tov, then there's an Ayin Ra, and there's a Lev Tov, and there's a Lev Ra. It seems repetitive. Why do we need to teach this? So Rabbeinu Yonah points out, this is a powerful idea, that the opposites of all good traits are not always bad, right? For example, this is his example, Midat Chasidut, right? A Chasidut, just to, again, we're not talking about the Hasidic movement, a Hasidim, but a Chassid in classical Torah and rabbinical literature is a person who goes above and beyond the letter of the law, right? A person who does more than he has to. As an example of this, I can't remember exactly in which chapter Maharal talks about this in Mesilat Yesharim, but if, for example, let's say you're in a room, it's a bit windy, right? It's perhaps in the fall, and the son is sitting with his father, and his father says, hey, would you mind closing the window? Okay, so he goes in and closes the window, right? Perfunctorily, he does it immediately. That's a wonderful thing. That's a tzaddik. A chassid is someone who thinks, hang on a second, why does my father ask me to close the window? He's asking me to close the window because he's cold. If he's cold, I could close the window and get him a blanket and get him a hot cup of tea. Right? He's looking to do more than what's asked. That's a chassid. He goes beyond and above the letter of the law. Fine. So we see that the opposite of midat chasidut is not that you're a bad person. You just aren't a person who goes above and beyond the letter of the law. You can still be a good person. It doesn't mean you're a bad person to lack midat chasidut. And I'm bringing this up because Rav Noach Weinberg, the founder of Ancient Torah, he says something interesting. It requires a bit of thought, and perhaps I'm going to give it a slightly looser interpretation. But he would often speak to people about what they thought the opposite of pain was. What's the opposite of pain? People would say, pleasure. That's fair. Rav Noach said, no. I think he might even have challenged them and said you're a hedonist. Oh, why? Because he says, the opposite of pain is not pleasure. The opposite of pain is comfort. And his argument was, again, a person has pain. What's the opposite? Lack of pain. And the same way we just said, the opposite of midat chasidut is not you're an evil person, you're not a rasha, you're just not a chassid, seemingly. So when he says the opposite of pain, it's not pleasure, it's comfort, because comfort means there's an absence of pain. And he says a deeper idea, a deeper look into what pleasure means, is pleasure will often involve pain. A person feels pleasure, and I think he generally means joy here. A person feels a deep sense of pleasure and satisfaction and joy when a person goes and he builds and he works in that process. I'm also quoting Rabbi Tatz. He also speaks about this. Rabbi Tatz says a person who might be sweating and grunting, and you look at his face and it's contorted in pain and agony, but he's singing on his inside, because the pain it's superficial and it's a means for him to achieve his goals. And so I think this is a nice idea. This, just because you have a good midah doesn't necessarily mean that the opposite of that good midah is automatically that it's like a rasha or something negative. I think that's the idea that Rabbi Yonah is trying to highlight here. Fine, so that's one idea. And the second is brought by the Maharal, and he asks a fantastic question. He asks a number of questions. One of them is, why is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asking his Talmidim this question? Why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai just tell us which path we should follow, right? That, I think, seems to be most of Pirkei Avot, right? There's a Pirkei Avot isn't like, oh, well, what are the three things that the world stands on? No, they tell us these are the three things the world stands on, right? Or here's how a person should behave, or here's the special midah that a person should cleave to. He doesn't go around asking. So why is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asking? What's the benefit here? Says Maharal, an astounding yesod is super important. He says like this. I'm going to read his words. He says, "V'kol adam hu nimshach achar midato l'shabech asher midato." Every person is attracted to his own midah, right? His own personal like inclination, in order to praise it. And by that he means, and I'll just say this more, perhaps more clearly from Nurture Their Nature. Right? This is a book that was released almost exactly last year by Rabbis Yosef, Lynn, and Rabbi Cohen. They said like this. They're talking about effectively identifying where we stand in order to work on ourselves, to build up our strengths, and then only after that, working on that thoroughly, can we address our weaknesses. And he says like this. He says, one of the classic tools we will learn is how to spiritually look at ourselves in the mirror by reflecting on which traits we admire most in others. Often it's common for a person to grow up, say, in a family or an environment where a certain midah is highly praised. For example, intellectual honesty, right? Or being a super chesed kind of person, or being extremely disciplined. These are these are very different midahs. All of them are wonderful, but they're extremely different. So a person might have an internal sense of the importance of, say, doing chesed, but when it comes down to it, they just, the amount of admiration and respect they have when they see a person who's able to not just kind of be like, no, this is wonderful. Be like, no, hang on a second. Like, what are the positive aspects here? What are the negative aspects here? What are the things that we could work on? How do we really see this? What's a broader perspective here? That person, even though they might have an appreciation for chesed, as we all should, his personal inclination, or her personal inclination, might be more towards the root of emet, of truth. And in fact, what they later on say, that quote is on page 71. This is on page 77 in footnote 3. It says, the word for character trait, midah, literally means measurement. In part, it is for this reason our midot become the vessels through which we measure and value other things. Our primary midah is therefore the meter through which the value of our other midot is measured. Right? We'll effectively filter that which we value most into other midot, even the ones that are praiseworthy, of course. So when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was asking, right? Or derech tova sheyidbak b'ha'adam. Right? When he's saying, what are the good character traits a person should follow? What are the negative ones? What he's trying to do, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai isn't asking because he's not sure himself. He's asking because he's trying to identify the roots of the students. What do they notice? And depending on what they notice, that'll tell him what they value most. And that's an important lesson for ourselves, right? In terms of, again, a person could grow up thinking it's all about being intellectually honest. But at the end of the day, the amount of just sheer respect and a desire to emulate a person who's just kulo chesed, who just is constantly giving, is just so happy to always give. I mean, it's good to be intellectually honest, but perhaps that might teach him that it would be more in line with a person's strengths and natural inclinations to be more of the giving type of person. And again, the vice versa, a person who might have grown up with an appreciation for being a giving person might say, but I really appreciate understanding the kind of the subtleties here, and what is kindness? How does that work? Or what's the proper way of perspective here? What's the correct theory going on here? Like, how can I look at other perspectives to get a deeper sense of what's happening? And a person should explore that and internalize it, because in that way they'll not only of course perfect themselves, but they'll be able to value other people and their other people's perspectives and how they might relate to certain positive attributes. So we'll leave it there, and we'll see you next time.